Thank you so much, Jeanette, for that wonderful talk. And now we're going to have some discussion around the subject of Virginia Woolf. And I'd like to begin by asking first Charlotte and then asking Kira about your personal response to this piece. So I wonder how it first struck you, Charlotte, when you read it.
When I read it, actually, I was really feeling like it was what I needed to hear. Like it was exactly the truth about what we're still struggling with. And even though we're very privileged, we have many opportunities to express ourselves, but I feel that the hardest part is the internalization of certain conventions, norms, perceptions that are so deeply rooted inside us that it takes probably a lifetime to overcome them. And I think what really spoke to me in that in her speech is, as you were saying, that the angel in the house is a woman. And it's about your own mother, but the archetype of the devoted mother, the sacredness of the devotion and the purity of that devotion. And it's something that terrifies all of us, that we need to believe that that devotion is untouchable, impossible to fail. But what Virginia Woolf tells us, but maybe she tells it in other pieces like Into the Lighthouse or other of her novels, is that that figure, that sacredness of the mother, she is always failing because her role is to stop chaos and death, but she's always going to fail because there's always going to be chaos and there's always going to be death at some point. And I feel that why Virginia Woolf became such a great writer in a way is because she lost her mother at a very crucial age, and that it gave her a certain freedom to be herself. And that's what really touched me when I read it. And I feel that we're still struggling with that. And it's not necessarily the relationship you have with your own mother, it's more with the symbol of what a good mother should be, and that haunts us all.
You read that so wonderfully, Kira, and with such passion. What struck you about it?
Well, I found this piece very interesting because actually Charlotte had sent me quite a few pieces, right? And we were sort of discussing quite a number of different pieces to read. And both of us really honed into this one. And it was interesting how we did, because we're both the mothers of very young children. And although Virginia Woolf was not a mother herself, the way that I read it when I first read it was absolutely the angel in the house as far as how you're meant to be as a mother. And the constant failure and the constant voice on your shoulder of how you're not doing it right. So what I find interesting about all of Virginia Woolf's work that I've read is that you can take it to mean so many different things. You know, obviously she was not talking about motherhood when she wrote this particular essay. And yet for me and Charlotte, with the particular things that we're kind of coming up against now, and particularly being working mothers, you know, it came to mean something that was very, very, very personal to us. And I think that's true of all of her writing, which is why I love it so much, but particularly this one.
I want to talk a bit about Virginia Woolf's style as a novelist, because this wonderful essay is so clear and so plain, but she was a really radical writer in her structure, the way that she constructed her books, and I'd like to touch on really how important she was in building the idea of modernism, in really bringing literature forward. I'll start with you, Jeanette, to discuss her not just politically, but in her literary experimentalism.
And I think there we have to root her also in what we know as the Bloomsbury group. And their sense of the visual arts, which was a great part, I think, of her method. She didn't want to do life as it is lived. She didn't want to do experience in that sense. She wanted to go underneath all of those things, into the fragments, into the places which don't yield so easily to confident, simple sentences, to paragraphs that build into stories, to stories that build into lives. She was always looking for the breakages and the fissures, because I think in her own mind she knew the breakages and the fissures. But also, one of her great friends was Roger Fry, the art critic, and he brought over to London at the Grafton Galleries, where for the first time the British, who are really have been rubbish at visual art, were confronted with these astonishing paintings by Matisse and Cézanne and Picasso. You think of those Picasso portraits where the eyes might be on the same side. So it's really trying to get at a reality which is beneath the shapes, the 3D dimensions, the surface world that we live. And she was fascinated by this, and many conversations about it with Roger Fry, and of course her sister, the painter Vanessa Bell, who later took up with Duncan Grant, about how you do represent reality, and whether indeed it is best served by a story with a beginning, a middle and an end, because actually nobody lives their life like that. It's complete and utter bollocks. And so she thought, no, I won't do that. I will try to show things in their shifting shapes without obvious endings, never the Hollywood ending, never the closure. The impressionistic quality of Virginia Woolf doesn't communicate so well, much more difficult. But yet we all recognise that as part of the truth of our lives, don't we? We sense ourselves in those fissures, in those fragments, in those lacunae, in the interstices, in the gaps, in the moments where we fall down the hole and drag ourselves up again. All of that. And each of you here in this room lives perpetually in 3 time zones. You think about the past, you're managing the present, you're wondering about the future. This is your simultaneous reality. You're not linear. Time for you is not linear. Time for you is significant. Your memories do not lie next to each other in chronological order. No, not at all. And this is what Virginia Woolf wanted to delve into. She wanted to show how the mind itself, the most complex object in the known universe, does not manage linear time very well at all. And there is indeed, isn't there, Into the Lighthouse, that marvellous section called Time Passes, where she simply comes out of the story of the Ramsays and talks about the effect of time on this house, whether it's the ivy growing up the wall, whether it's the damp coming in from the rainy autumn nights, all of the things which actually do constitute the material reality, but which are often overlooked. And yet those things, you suddenly glance at it, a patch of damp, a bit of ivy, it will conjure a memory, a smell. Proust was good at that. Something that takes you out of this moment into another moment. That is the life of the mind, not the beginning, the middle and the end. And that's what she wanted to show.
Charlotte, we could describe Virginia Woolf's fiction as challenging, or not necessarily easily accessible. You were talking about returning to it after a while and having to work your way back into it. And I'd like you to say a little bit about that for our audience, because I think people will find it very encouraging.
Everyone knows Virginia Woolf, but very few people have actually read her novels, and it's understandable because she's a difficult writer. It takes time to enter her novels and to pursue the reading, and she tries to create a dizziness as well, with several voices, and sometimes you get lost and you don't know who's speaking, and you feel claustrophobic and you're like, I just don't understand what's happening anymore. And actually it took me time to really go back to her writings, and I had a different approach, meaning that I felt like it was pure poetry and that you could actually read her as poetry, and not necessarily in a linear way, but you can also just read some pages. Yes. And like Mrs. Dalloway, you have some pages, some descriptions of London, some parts of it that are just so strong in the sensation you get. And even if you don't understand everything, it's just pure beauty. And that's why you should people should not be afraid of Virginia Woolf.
And I wonder, Kira, and again, just hearing you read it, she both is able to acknowledge her own privilege, but also talk, as Jeanette was just saying, about the situation that women are in. And I wonder how you have thought about that issue, given that we are women who have a platform, and how we can use that platform.
And I mean, in a very similar way that Jeanette just said, I mean, I think you absolutely have to acknowledge it. I mean, it's unavoidable, But you can equally say, do I still believe that a woman should be paid the same amount as a man? Yes. Do I still believe that a woman should have the right to choose? Yes. And are there many places in the world where she doesn't have the right to choose for her own body? There are. So, I think I can speak from a place of immense privilege, but still say that the problem for women is one for all of us, that there are obviously specific needs in different places. But as far as equal pay, as far as the right to choose go, I think that we can all be sort of on a similar footing in that.
I think of Virginia Woolf as a very elegant writer, and someone with a unique elegance. And I wonder how that elegance speaks to you, Charlotte.
Well, I would say that, in a way, elegance, I would relate it as well to a French word, la délicatesse, and it's being sensitive to the different variations and tonalities, and being able to go from one to the other in a very smooth way. And I think that was one of her highest qualities. There was always that gentleness that made her very elegant, I find. But that's my personal interpretation of her elegance.
Thank you so much, Charlotte. I will thank all of you, but I will turn back to you to close out our wonderful rendezvous, which it's been such a delight to participate in.
Well, thank you all for being here, and it was such an amazing moment, and I wish we could have even continued. And listening to you, Jeanette, is just like time stops, and it's great. Thank you so much.